Welcome to the Boat Babe podcast with your favorite boat babe here, Mary Allison. Here we talk boats, DIY projects, and manifestation tips to living your best vacay life on the water. If anything's going to happen, y'all know it. It's going to happen out there. So let's go explore together. Welcome back to another episode of the Boat Babe podcast with your favorite boat babe here, Mary Allison. Today's episode, I wanted to talk about hull material, like your boat hull material. Like, what is your boat made of? And I'm not really talking about smaller boats, like little runabouts. I'm talking more about larger sailboats, smaller sailboats, yachts, kind of anything in between. And the reason for this episode is there is a huge fishing boat. One of those commercial fishing boats that just take people out and they all have tiny little miniature rods and there's like 100 of them all standing around the side of the boat hoping to catch something, like, for, I don't know, $75 a day or an hour or however they do it, where they just go out in the Gulf and you're like, I went deep sea fishing, and you're like, well, kind of. That kind of boat. So it's right next to me in the stall. And I walked over to it the other day with some friends in the yard, and the hull, like the bottom below the water line, is made of just balsa with, balsa cord, a little bit of fiberglass, but just thick, wet, dripping balsa. And I was like, you know what? When I was in my boat buying process, the biggest question I had, first of all, about insurance, but we're not going to cover that right now. The second question was, what is your boat made out of? Because I had learned just from talking to friends in the Caribbean, them living on their boats, reading their blogs, that your hull material really, really matters. And so I wanted to discuss that. I wanted to discuss that with you if you are looking to buy a boat. I also just wanted to discuss that with you if you already own a boat and you're not even sure what your hull material is. You might not even care. But when it comes to maintenance and when it comes to red flags or things to look for, it's always good to know what is under my feet. What is keeping me dry? What is holding all of my precious belongings and my family apart from like sinking in the water? So let's get started. And I honestly wasn't going to talk about, I was only going to talk about the core material. But I realized there's actually a lot of benefit to having an aluminum boat or a steel boat. And so I just wanted to include that just a little bit. But so I want to start out with aluminum. This isn't something I even thought about having for the hull material or the build material of the sailboat that I wanted to buy, because my preferences were more blue water cruiser that has been chartered, built in the mid 80s. I had a vision that didn't include aluminum, but I was the captain of a 1964 63-foot burger named Lady J, who was an aluminum boat. And that the thickness, the strength of that hull saved that boat from being sunk during the 2010 flood in Nashville, where it was an absolute disaster. The whole entire city and outlying areas flooded. Like, if you didn't have a home in Nashville that flooded, like, you were so lucky. So while I was the captain, we had this crazy rain come from the south, I guess it was the southwest. And it was one of those fronts that just came, and the rain kept falling until everybody's like, oh shit, like everyone's getting flooded. Cars are being flooded. All of our rivers are overflowing. And the first thing I was like, what about Lady J? Like, what? I've got to get to Lady J. Lady J's on the Cumberland River, in a marina, like with floating docks. But I was like, what the heck? So I got to Lady J and she was 30 feet in the air floating. So basically, like, we had to take dinghies, any type of boat we could find, set up contraptions to get out to the docks, and they were covered. So they were just covered slips, all floating. But then they all came off their pilings. So have you ever walked down a dock where you're like, oh, there's this huge steel beam going up and down, and so the dock can float up and down that huge pole. And of course you think like it's not going to float off of this, like that's crazy. Well, it did. All of them floated off their steel pilings. And so I was the only one. I was in the middle. I was on B dock. And so we tied up A dock to B dock and B dock to C dock. And I turned on Lady J's engines, and I maneuvered the entire B dock with probably 50 boats, maybe 40, with C dock and A dock, to get them as close as we could to back to their pilings. So when the water started to go down, we would hope that the pilings would go back into the holes in the dock. God, talking about it brings me back to that memory. It was the most terrifying experience. Homes were getting raided all around us. Everything was exploding, electrical boxes exploding. It was insane to have our city flooded. And so the boat, Lady J, had been owned by Alan Jackson. And what he had done, he refits cars and boats, and to basically like their pristine condition, like how they were brand new. And so he had extended Lady J's slip and added extra pilings, but those pilings were not as tall as the original structural pilings of the actual docks. And so in the middle of the night, we came down on a piling, and if we didn't have an aluminum hull, Lady J would have she would have just been stabbed by the piling and slowly sunk. It would have been horrible. There would have been absolutely nothing we could have done. And so we came down on that piling, and I heard this huge pop in the middle of the night, and I woke up and I was like, oh my God, what is that? And my dad was with me, and he got his box cutter and just tapped the lines, and they just slingshotted back. I mean, it was so tight. We were basically floating in the water by our lines that were connected to the dock. And all that pressure on that piling, the miniature piling that Alan had put in. And I had put the boat in gear, I guess going backwards. I think the only way we could get off of that piling before she really, really did some more damage was I just floored it backwards as much as I could and just scraped her down the middle. But because we had an aluminum hull, she was fine. And once we hauled her out, she sold about 5.5 years later. I'm assuming we hauled her out before then, but all I do remember is when we did haul her out that one last time, just seeing there was that huge puncture, but it didn't go through the hull. Like, it wasn't even anything to repair. So aluminum hulls can be awesome. Oddly enough, though, a con of an aluminum hull. So I had hauled out my boat at Pensacola Shipyard, and there was another burger there, like Lady J, but the larger. I think it was a 72 or a 74. They're just amazing. This family lived on it. It was gorgeous. But during the boat build, so aluminum doesn't like to mix with other metals. Just like lots of metals don't like to mix with other metals. So one of the workers, whenever they were, I think this was after the hull was made or poured or however they put it together, they had dropped a tool into the hull and then welded the interior together into the aluminum hull, and the metals corroded together, and they had to totally take off the whole bow of the boat, like from the water line down, and rebuild the bow of this gorgeous burger because the metal was eaten away by a tool that a worker had left. And I wish I had more information. I wish I knew more about exactly that, metals and how they react to each other. That's something that I'm going to have to ask my dad to hop on here once with me and talk about. But that was a really random downside to aluminum that I don't think anybody else hopefully would have a story about. But I mean, if it happened to that boat and I happen to see it, I'm assuming it happens to other boats. But let's also talk about aluminum in fresh water. Aluminum in fresh water, fine. It just grows some gunk. It's got some slime. No big deal. Probably never going to feel the hand of a diver cleaning it. Never going to be hauled out. No big deal, right? So Dad just bought a houseboat. That's what's right next to me right now. And the aluminum hull has just hit the rocks a million times over the years, scrapes. I mean, that boat has just weathered whatever's come at her, and then she's fine. Well, the boat was just shipped down here from Center Hill, freshwater to saltwater. And Center Hill is, like I mentioned in, I think, last week's episode, it's about an hour east of Nashville. It's a man-made lake. It's huge, 60 miles long, hundreds of feet deep. And Dad shipped it down here, and it's like, oh, oops, their drop's what, 11 grand on a bottom job? I mean, it cannot, aluminum has to be protected in saltwater. And so you've got to paint the bottom for sure in saltwater. There's also a really awesome boat that was built. How am I going to literally draw a blank right now? Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to come back to it. It's an aluminum boat. Everybody follows them on YouTube. And I feel like such a ditz because, oh, it's Seeker. Duh. Sailing Vessel Seeker. So if you go on YouTube, Sailing Vessel Seeker is like number 2. Like everybody knows Seeker. So Doug was our boat neighbor for a while, but his draft is too deep. He couldn't get back behind us in Pirates Cove. He was off the front in the bay, and he anchored for months just doing work. So he built Seeker in his backyard in Oklahoma. It is 70, 80 feet, 9-foot draft, Chinese junk rig. So he came through, and the boat was all aluminum. And one of the things was you have to wear shoes. And I know this is dumb, but you will get aluminum shards in your feet so fast on those boats. Oh my gosh. So there's a difference between Doug building Seeker in his backyard and having to wear shoes. Lady J's hull's built of aluminum and she looks like a classic fiberglass yacht. Totally different, but either way, both of those boats are going to last forever if they're taken care of. Okay, we're going to jump to steel. This is something I really didn't care to talk about until I found a really great article about steel boats and how if you build a steel boat correctly, like, and I honestly, I can't even get into the details of what correctly means, but basically the biggest problem with steel boats is that they rust. So if you get all like the pits out, the pitting out of it, you make it with really thick steel and gosh, I don't even know what's another. Yeah, basically like if steel boats are built right, they can look like a fiberglass yacht. But the biggest thing is, and he says this, and I don't think I guess he meant this jokingly, and it was really funny to read when I was reading articles about steel boats, but they're super strong. If you want to run your boat aground and catch it on fire, then this is the best boat for you. So basically he talks about like, if you're prone to running up on reefs, if you're prone to running aground, if you're prone to your anchor dragging and you ending up on the beach, like get a steel boat because you're golden. Like they'll never have issues. They're not going to be punctured. Your bottom paint might be scraped and scratched. But they don't make steel boats like they used to anymore. Like you see the old fishing boats that are made out of steel and they're just washed up from a hurricane, still hanging out in Bon Secours, but you don't ever see them repaired. And I found a YouTube family that had found an old steel boat and they stripped the you-know-what out of it for probably a year and started stealing. What word is that? Putting back together, forming more steel, whatever. And they knew how to do it. So they could mold the boat to make it look like a really pretty hull. I can't imagine like learning how to work with steel and melting it and molding it and using, I don't know, the hot tools. I'm sorry. I didn't do that much research on steel. But it sounds fascinating. It sounds interesting. I wouldn't even know how to like add or take away a through hole? That's where my brain goes. It's like, what do you do if you do need to get through that steel? Like, what happens? But one of the things that is great about a steel boat, you can go to different countries and you're always going to have somebody who knows how to work on steel. Steel's not just going to run out. So that is definitely a benefit. One of the cons of steel, though, is they are not production boats. So if you are going to build a boat out of steel, it's going to be probably really expensive, and you're going to have to work alongside the designer, because there's not some cookie cutter mold that you can just put with a steel boat. Most likely it's going to be something that's going to be more custom. Let's move on to wood boats. My experience with wood boats is very small, because you don't see a whole lot of just straight up wood boats out there. But I had boat neighbors, Dreamweaver. That boat was incredible. It was a 1949 shrimp boat turned, I think, charter boat, like day charters, on the bay. And my neighbors lived on it half the year, and the other half, they lived in their little artist home in Biloxi, Mississippi. But they loved their boat. They loved Dreamweaver. And the thing about that boat, though, and it was the wood planks, those old wood planks painted white. That boat's bilge would pump out every 5 minutes. And I'm talking like 5 gallons, 10 gallons, probably every 5 to 10, 15 minutes. So the owner was constantly changing bilge pumps, which just terrified me to watch. And then once they went out of town, and their bilge was going off a whole lot, and it just kept going on, and it kept going, and then it just stopped. And I don't know if I wasn't really paying attention, or I just was not sure exactly what the plan was when they were coming back. Maybe this is normal, maybe this is fine. I'm really not sure. But they got back and realized the water in their engine room was up to their engine, and everything was floating in their bilge. And he immediately jumped in the water with a mask and cotton, and went underneath and shoved the wood boards with cotton, and then replaced the bilge pump, I'm guessing underwater. And then, well, obviously pulling the old one out, replacing it, putting the new one in. You know what I mean? And all the water pumped out, but he was freaking out pissed. So I'm guessing it's like a normal thing that's not normal all the time, because he knew how to fix it, but his anger was as if this didn't happen yearly, but maybe like every other year. So he also mentioned that, when you pull out a wooden boat, you can't leave it out. Anytime that he had to work on the boat to haul out, he would haul out for like a week, and then he would have to go back in the water, because the wood will shrink. I guess when it's wet, it expands and it holds together. And then once you haul it out for long enough, it shrinks, and you won't be able to put it back in the water. I'm not suggesting going out and buying a wood boat. If you are looking for a wood boat, you probably grew up on a wood boat. So that's all the information I have about wood boats. Okay. Ferro cement. Y'all are going to be like, wait, what? Yes, a cement boat. So we had a boat neighbor named Cement, because it was cement. So Cement was probably a 39, 40 foot boat. I don't know what it was exactly. All I know is that it was ferro cement, and they're out there. The downside is a lot of insurance companies won't insure them anymore, because cement tends to have a lot of design flaws if it's not made properly, and the steel mesh that surrounds the cement mold is not completely airtight. That means water's going to seep in there, and it's going to rust your steel, basically steel rebar that's holding the cement together, and it'll start to crumble. And I mean, unless I guess if it's like a ferro cement core, and you don't necessarily puncture the fiberglass on the outside, maybe you're fine. But moisture's just going to get in a boat somehow anyway. And so all I know is that that rebar and that steel mesh just starts to rust and just disintegrates. The cool thing though about ferro cement, back in the war, like World War II, and even before that, they would make a lot of production ferro cement boats, and they're still around today. So they definitely last a long time if they're made properly, but it's not something that is easily created now. I think it's also really expensive to manufacture. Okay, now I want to move on to what's most likely what you're going to find on the internet looking for your boat. You're going to either have a fiberglass hull or you're going to have a hull that's cored. And most likely, and I'm not speaking across the board. I'm not going to get into the PVC, the foam, the honeycomb, all that stuff. I'm talking about balsa and pure fiberglass. When I was boat shopping, I found a really great, I think it was like a 40-foot CNC out of Camarillo, California. Gorgeous boat. The prettiest red paint job. The layout was perfect. I'd gotten to the point where I'd contacted the broker. I wanted to buy it. And I said, oh, red flag. What is it made out of? That entire boat was made out of balsa core. The whole thing, including the hull. Like down the water line, everything. And I'm like, oh, shoot. I felt so bad for that owner trying to sell that boat. There's no way. He's going to have an idiot. No offense if you have a balsa core boat with like full everything, your whole boat's balsa. But he's got to have somebody who really doesn't have a clue what they're buying to buy that boat. Balsa started out after fiberglass hulls were created. So like my Endeavor is thick fiberglass, like all throughout the hull. And then the top is a wood core. The wood core, yeah, I've got rain leak issues, but it's fixable. The fiberglass hull structure is, I'm not going to say it's as strong as steel, but it's freaking strong. It will hold. I could probably be up on a beach and I wouldn't even flex. But what happened was in the late 80s and early 90s, balsa became a thing because it was super lightweight. It was cheap. You could construct it really easily. But the problem is people didn't realize that you have to have balsa in a really, really strict environment of basically no moisture at all. No moisture in the air. You can't have it around any rain. And these factories were having balsa out in their parking lots, under tarps. They would have balsa inside, their factories just hanging out in the humidity of Florida. Like basically, if you have a boat with balsa, you have a boat that already has a moisture problem from day one. So I kind of compare balsa to smoking. Like, back in the day, it was like doctors promoting smoking. Smoking is just great for your health. Everybody's smoking. And all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, everybody's dying from smoking. It's kind of like that, where it's like everybody was like, oh, balsa's just like the next best core. It's going to be awesome. Your boat's lightweight. It's going to race super fast. And then they're like, oh shit, no. All these boats are full of moisture and water, and it's disgusting. So I would suggest avoiding balsa at all costs. And Sea Ray had an issue with balsa for a long time. Lots of sailboats had issues with balsa because they, especially the race boats. And, I have seen way too many boats, just like the one next to me, just dripping with a wet core. Dripping, like constantly dripping, like it never ever dries. And so if you just puncture through that fiberglass, you just have water just constantly coming out of your boat. Termite damage is a big problem with balsa because termites love moisture and they love damp, dark places. It also makes your boat really heavy because it never dries. So basically you just have this big, heavy weight in the water. So avoid balsa. Fiberglass is obviously the number one construction that you want for a hull. But the issue that I've seen, especially after living in the Caribbean and being surrounded by credit card captains who come and charter their, whatever catamaran for, the week and run into everything. And they run them aground and they run into each other and they run them up on the beach. I mean, those production boats these days, from what I'm saying, and I am not saying all of them, but a lot of the production boats, especially catamarans, their hulls are like Pearson, a 1/4 inch thick of fiberglass, 1/2 inch thick of fiberglass. Like, they're really, really trusting that you know how to navigate and you'll never be in a situation where you'll hit anything. And for me, that's just not a risk I'm going to take. There was I'm pretty sure it was a Motor Cat. I'm not sure the brand, maybe a Lagoon. I'm not sure if Lagoon even makes Motor Cats. Don't hold me to it. But I want to say it was something similar to that on the hard at Nanny Key for months and months and months because somebody had ran it up under the rocks. From what it looked like, it had to have sunk. But for some reason, insurance just thought it could be put back together and nobody would total it. So it was just in this big insurance issue, not knowing what to do with it. But when I looked at it up close, I'm like, this thing's like putting paper, like building a boat out of paper and putting it in the water with some Mod Podge on it, thinking it's going to float. Like, you couldn't accidentally hit anything without puncturing those hulls and sinking your boat. And so older boats most likely are made of really thick fiberglass. I'm not saying all of them. Like I said, Pearson is not, but like my Endeavor, super thick. I mean, the hull has absolutely no issues whatsoever. No delamination. I mean, it's just, I'm so blessed to have a boat that is structurally so sound. So definitely look at your thickness or thinness of your fiberglass of your hull, just so you know. I mean, if you fall in love with a boat with a really thin hull, just be aware of your surroundings. Just take extra precautions, have an extra bilge pump or two just in case, because you just don't want a surprise one day. You'd rather be prepared. And I want to go back. There's also one more core I want to talk about. This one is big in the sport fish industry right now, and it just is mind blowing. But huge sport fish boats, especially custom made boats, are being made out of a wood core, like plywood, wood core, 100%, all the way around, hull and everything. And I'm just like, what? That goes back to that. You can't really hit anything. You can't really screw up. But I mean, for what these boats are doing, it makes it where they're super lightweight. They can go at top speed. It's lower on fuel. I mean, I don't know enough about their makeup. I would love to visit a factory to see how these boats are actually made, but it's just insane to me the amount of money that's going into these boats and the amount of equipment and the fishing equipment and what they're used for and how long they're offshore, and they're just fiberglass and some plywood. But you know what? I'm not the boat manufacturer. I'm not the boat builder. I'm not the boat owner. I am just expressing my opinion about how scary that sounds. But yes, you have lots and lots of hull options to choose from, lots of hull designs, lots of hull core makeups. And I just encourage you to do your research if you're boat shopping. I also encourage you just to do your research if you've already bought a boat. My dad had bought a 19-foot Key West. It was a 1993. It was the best boat. I got so much boating experience out on Home Office was its name. And it turns out, though, we had left Home Office down here on the Gulf Coast, and the drains got clogged with leaves during a huge storm and debris, and the boat filled with water and just sat because we didn't realize it. So we came back the following year and we were like, oh shoot, the Key West is filled with water. And that water had seeped into the wood transom of that boat, and it was the last year that Key West had actually not created the entire hull out of fiberglass. They had kept the wood transom, and that boat rode low in the water, dangerously low. And I mean, we kept that boat in pristine condition. It would look, I mean, it would, I mean, it looked gorgeous. It looked new. I mean, it looked vintage, years and years and years later, but we had to sell it. It was so dangerous. And we told the person who bought it, like, hey, we aren't liable if you flip over. Like, we're letting you know, full disclosure, this boat rides really low because the water's not coming out of this transom. And now looking back, I see we probably could have paid somebody to rebuild the transom because it's totally doable. But I guess at the time we didn't want to put the money into it or the energy. We had a Boston whaler, at the same time that we played on. Then we sold both of those and got, 19-foot Sea Hunt, then a 24-foot, I think, and a 25-foot. So, it's just always good to know your core hull, your core. It's always good to be aware of what it's made of, just in case you have a hiccup like we do where it floods and, fills with water for like 8 months. But I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Go ahead and give me 5 stars and follow me at That Boat Babe on Instagram. I would love to hear your positive feedback and your comments. Share this episode with your friends or any boaters out there that are longing to be out on the water, or any friends that are out on the water. So I love y'all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I can't wait to talk to you next week. Okay, bye.